Christmas tree interrupted. So, after 42 years of marriage, we were finally going to do it. My wife and I were going to buy a live Christmas tree. After 30 years of putting up the same artificial tree each Christmas, 30 years of losing the argument, and, to be fair to her, saving a ton of money, the time had come, now that the kids were grown and out on their own, for me to indulge my dream of having a real tree. Just think of the fragrance, I said. The beautiful pine scent. That's Christmas. Uh-huh, she said, unconvinced. But she didn't roll her eyes. She would never roll her eyes. She didn't have to. Always the business person in our partnership, this little trip to the Christmas tree lot was one of her many ways of saying, I love you, Bill. Years earlier, she had admonished me with, don't tell me, show me. And we had been doing that ever since. Those words could have been, I suppose, our bumper sticker. We have pine scent, you know, she added. I rolled my eyes. Lasts for 2 minutes and disappears before the family arrives, I said. You'll have to water it every day and vacuum up the pine needles. Small price to pay, I said. I looked at her sitting in the passenger seat as we drove together to the tree lot at the Little League fields. The Little League sold Christmas trees each year as a fundraiser. She looked straight ahead at the snowflakes buffeting the windshield as we drove. She elected not to mention the large price I was about to pay for the tree. Instead, she said, at least we're getting snow. You'd have to know Pat to know how big a concession this was. She was showing, not telling, again. But just because of the soul she is, and I suppose to make sure her thick-headed husband didn't miss her point, she turned and smiled at me. She smiled at me. If I told you how beautiful my wife is, you'd say I'm given to hyperbole. My friends have asked on many an occasion how I ever convinced her to date me in the first place. I could dance, I say. That, I suppose, is somewhat believable. We arrived at the lot. Pat said, you go, I'll stay here. It's too cold for me. 3 years of cancer and chemo had taken their toll. I'll leave the engine running. I'll be quick, I said, getting out of the car. I looked back at her. She watched me through the windshield. So you're finally going to get a real tree? It was Dan, one of my buddies, tending the lot. Yeah, I said. Pat agrees it's time. He looked at me, warming his hands over the open flame rising from the 50-gallon steel drum, but said nothing. I quickly found a nice tree and asked Dan to set it aside. I'll be back, I said. Returning to the car, I got in. You're right, it is cold out there. No tree? I asked Dan to set it aside. I have to sleep on it. I thought you wanted a real tree. I do, I think. It'll be here tomorrow. She touched the side of my face with her hand. It was so soft, so warm. I put my hand over hers. I might still buy the tree, I said. She smiled, showing, not telling. God, those eyes. Looks like company, I said, pulling up into our driveway, seeing our daughter's car parked there. I'll get your door. I parked the car, got out, and walked around to hold the door open for Pat, and to help her out. She held onto my arm tightly as we walked slowly and slipped a bit in the wet snow. Up on the covered porch now, she said, I think I'll sit here for a minute. The 2 steps up into our home might as well have been the side of a mountain. You go in. Okay, I said, bending to help her sit on the porch swing. It was elevated slightly and easier for her to get in and out of. I went inside, turned and looked at her through the storm door. She waved weakly. Grampy! I was practically tackled from behind by my 12-year-old grandson, Shane, who now hugged me around the waist. Where were you? Turning, I saw Mary, our daughter, and Jim, her husband, watching from the kitchen. Grammy and I went to look at Christmas trees, I said. Really? Shane looked back at his parents. You okay, Dad? Mary asked. Never better, I said, lifting Shane. Where's Grammy? He asked. On the porch swing, I said, putting him down. Why don't you go sit with her? She'd like that. Grampy, he said, looking through the storm door to, no doubt, the empty porch swing. Shane, I interrupted. Do you still believe in Santa? Do you? He asked. In St. Nicholas? In the spirit of Christmas? Of course. My friends don't believe, but Grampy does. Plus, I didn't ask about your friends. I asked if you believe. Shane looked up at me. Yes, he said finally. Then looking at Mary, he said, "Can I, Mom?" 2 minutes, we have to get going. Sorry, Dad, we should have called. No problem, I said, walking over to her and Jim, hugging them. Their visits now in the months since Pat passed have been a godsend. Shane walked out onto the porch and sat down on the empty swing. "I wish you were here," he said. "I miss you. I love you. Granby misses you too." I decided I would put up the fake tree just one more year in her memory. I never thought it was such a bad little tree, I thought to her. She would have loved the Peanuts reference. 2 minutes later, watching Mary and Jim on the porch as they were leaving, they said something to Shane and he responded, "But she is here, Mom." I felt her hand on my face, showing, not telling. Thank you.